So we're at the Academy during the Academy showing of Into the Woods.
That's nice.
Upstairs.
Is this the Academy showing?
This is the Academy showing. Well, there's a few, but
There's a few.
this is one of the. Well, it's nice because it's an all-guild one, which means many people are here from different guilds, and our cast is here, which is sensational, and our creatives and everybody. Cool. Yeah.
So, what was the biggest decision that you had to make? I mean, first of all, didn't you first start out with a bigger budget at Disney?
You know, we never really had a bigger budget because they were, I mean, we had asked for bigger budgets, that's for sure. But they were really pretty strong and adamant about, you know, could we make it at a certain price? And for this kind of film, it was challenging, for sure.
Well, there's a lot on the screen.
Well, that's good.
He did an amazing job. And people don't think it was made for a price.
Well, you know what, I think it was because we were just very, I don't know, we really were meticulous about how we put it together and made sure, for instance, that we had a very small amount of time to shoot. But the rehearsal process saved us because we had over 4 weeks of rehearsal. So we were so prepared. Every scene, every number was rehearsed. So when we got to the day of shooting, we weren't figuring out what are we going to do. We were shooting on the day.
Do you know how many pages like you did a day, or can you do that with a musical? Because of course,
you know, it's different because songs.
Yeah.
But we, you know, there were many times. I mean, there was never a day where we did, you know, half of a song. Like we did a full song. I mean, you know, it was sort of like that. But
There were lots and lots of songs. I was trying to count. How many full songs?
Well, I know, for instance, there are 20 songs on the CD. That's how I know. And then on the double disc CD, there are 50 cuts because we have so much score.
And there's instrumentals. I saw that.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the opening number, to me, looks like it was the most difficult challenge. It has to have been a bear to have pulled that out.
It was complicated, and we spent a lot of time on that.
it looks amazing.
Well,
No, I mean, it looks like you really worked it out. I mean, it's
Well-
you must have had, did you storyboarded it?
This
Some
is
of
the
it.
I Wish sequence where you have
Exactly.
all the characters
Exactly.
launching their wishes into the
It's the
woods.
introduction of most of the characters in the piece, which is so important, and it really was our chance to open it up a little too.
Yeah,
stage.
and yet, you know, you don't realize the cuts in the music. Is there a lot
You can see them because you know them so well.
I don't. I should know them, but I don't. It just flows so well. You don't realize that things were snipped and cut and
I mean,
trimmed.
in many ways it was, in some ways it's the most faithful portion of the whole piece in a way because, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this piece, or I thought it would work as a film, and I remember talking to you about this, was because the opening sequence is so cinematic, even on stage. You're intercutting back and forth between so many different stories. And I thought, well, that's the language of cinema that you were doing in the 80s, you know, the late 80s. And that's really what it was. But you're intercutting back and forth between all these different stories. And it felt like, you know, because I always have said, and we truly believe this, that in a film, especially film musical, you must establish the rules of how you're going to do it in the beginning.
I was going to ask you about that. Because you do set up a purposefully artificial theatrical universe, if I may use those words.
Yes.
You tell me what it is.
Well, just in terms of the fact that they're singing, I mean, the first thing that's spoken is sung, you know, I wish. I mean, the first line. And then we establish that you're going to be hearing singing, and it's going to move seamlessly into James's dialogue, and then back into singing. And that sets up the rules of how we're going to, and the language of how we're going to tell this piece. And you think that's a simple thing, but the truth is one of the hardest things to do in a musical is to understand why they're singing. And because when it doesn't work and they start to sing, it's jarring. And this, because you've established the rules at the top, you know, I think then you understand that this is how it's going to be told. And it was an incredibly helpful 16-minute prologue to set that up for the rest of the evening.
Did Les Mis give you some permission just to go for it?
Well, you know, interesting, you know, in terms of Les Mis, we have done something sort of, I guess, a hybrid in a way, because there's live vocals and there's pre-recorded vocals, but for me, the test is always, it should always seem live. It should feel like it's live. I don't like to do a blanket, like we're going to do all this or all that. I like to serve each number for what it needs.
But if Cinderella's running, that's a bit rough.
Yeah, or it's 3 in the morning and you're shooting and it's not going to be great. Or you're singing on a waterfall and all you're going to hear is the water.
But what the actors were saying, it was so great when they came to lay down the tracks because they knew what their physical activity was going to be. I think, don't they sometimes lay down the tracks before you don't rehearse it?
Yes,
and all
exactly.
Of a
And then they have no idea what they're doing.
Well, it doesn't feel organic.
No,
Yeah.
they knew physically and emotionally and everything what we were. I mean, we were so prepared when we walked into pre-records and filming. We had done the work. I mean, and as an example, in Takes Two, James tickles Emily, and she goes, "You've changed." She's laughing, right? But that's because, and she did that in the pre-record because she knew physically that's what we were doing because we had rehearsed that a million times. So, it should all feel like it's happening. That's the magic of it.
But when you talked about what you were going to do with the adaptation, what were those discussions like? Were there going to be cuts? Were there going to be changes to make it into a movie?
Yeah, I'm really bad about remembering things, but I think we just started at the top, and I think I would go off and write things and bring them to Rob, and Rob would, because we didn't really didn't know one another, so it's like a little marriage, and you would see what worked, what didn't work, what you would like to do, and then that would lead to further conversations, so that when I would go off again to write, I kind of knew a little bit more where I was heading.
I mean, we knew all throughout that we obviously had to condense because there's a certain pace to film that's different than stage. On stage it's, 2 hours and 45 minutes before the piece is over.
Well, with an intermission, yeah.
Yeah, but on film, it's a 2-hour film, and I don't honestly feel like it could have played even 5 more minutes without feeling. There's just a natural pace. I mean, Chicago was 1 hour and 50 minutes long.
Really?
There's a pace to film that, and with music, because you set up a certain rhythm, and if you overstay your welcome, it starts feeling like long, and it feels even longer than when you do a film that's not a musical, because of the musicality of the piece, you feel the rhythm.
Well, there's a lot of stories being told.
That's what I was going to say. There must have been some kind. Did you need to lose some people? That.
Well, the mysterious man went.
Right.
Cinderella's father went. The narrator went because that was a stage convention. The thing is, we were so careful about the translation because it's such a beloved piece and it's such a strong piece. So we held on to everything we could in terms of the central core of the piece. But at the same time, it was so clear that we would do the piece a disservice if we didn't reimagine it as a film first. It had to be a film. For people who've never seen the piece on stage, it makes no sense unless you really make sure you're serving it as a film. And I have to say that James and Steve were unbelievably flexible about that.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, that's unusual, I have to say.
Is it?
Yeah, in my experience.
Huh.
It doesn't feel Disneyfied. A lot of people were saying, they're going to Disneyfy Sondheim. It doesn't feel that way at all.
Well, that wasn't, that what got out there was just completely wrong, a complete misinterpretation of what had happened.
Yeah, but it's the way you shot it, and it has atmosphere that's not Disney. If I don't.
It has edge. Well,
Yeah.
Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood are not what you would imagine as
I
Disney
never
figures.
thought about Disney when I
Neither's
was
the
working.
wolf.
I mean, I never was aware of the Disney thing at all. I just think they're a studio that, first of all, the fact that they were doing it, knowing full well that it's a very sort of modern fairy tale, I was impressed that they were interested in redefining what a modern fairy tale could be and sort of pushing the boundaries of what that could be for their company. Because Cinderella does not end up with the prince, and there's adultery, and there's some a very deep sort of adult themes in this piece, and that's why I love it, and that's why I wanted to do it. And so when they said yes, they understood what we were doing. We did a reading for them of the piece so they would know.
That was
A
smart.
full reading.
That was great.
This is
Very
Rich Ross Enterprise,
That's right,
correct?
exactly. Well, actually, the reading, Alan Horn was was there by that time.
Okay.
So there was a transition that happened while we had started. But by the time we did the reading, Alan was there. I think it's important for them, I wanted them to see what we were doing, understand exactly what we were doing, because musicals are difficult to read on the page. You get a script, honestly, and this is what an executive does with a script. They get to the song and they flip the page. They don't understand that the story's happening in the song. So I wanted them to hear it and feel it, and we needed it to kind of say,
Well, that was what I thought was great. From my point of view, to hear it was great.
yeah, very helpful.
And you were going to have an extra song, which I was looking forward to.
Yes, we all
Oh,
were.
You could have gotten a nomination.
It was.
What happened?
We shot it. It was a fantastic piece.
A Meryl Streep number,
Meryl
right?
Streep number for The Witch. It was called "She'll Be Back." It's a beautiful piece, and we test screened it with the piece in it, with the song in it, and it was interesting when it was playing. It played beautifully, and I was so happy. But by the time we got to 10, 15 minutes later into the act, or if you think of it like a 3-act structure, like most films are, it's like our sort of final act, there was a fatigue that set in, and it felt like we had overstayed our welcome, and that perhaps why we were feeling that is because what had happened prior. You always feel the repercussions of it later.
Of course, you pay the price for it. Yeah.
Right. And by the time we got to Last Midnight, which should be the Witch's big ultimate moment, it didn't play because she'd already had a big moment. And we realized that we had gone off story. And
It was hard. I mean, we wanted to have a new song. It was
Excited
very hard
about
to figure out where to put. And Steve wrote a new song for when they did it in London, which had the same effect, even though it was much earlier. And the show is just, in its way, so tightly woven. It's hard to fill with.
And it tells you. I mean, what was interesting,
that's interesting.
the film told us. I mean, I didn't listen. You realize at a certain point that you're serving the film. You're not serving Stephen Sondheim. You're not serving us. You're not serving Meryl. You must serve the piece, and it's telling you the structure doesn't work as good as the piece was. So the only saving grace, of course, is that it's on the DVD, which is very helpful.
So talk a little bit about what Meryl brought to this. I mean, she sure did. And I remember I went to the first screening, and I was very, the Q&A you did on satellite and everything.
Yes.
I was very struck by how happy Meryl looked.
Yeah.
Because she knows, right?
Yeah.
She knows that she killed, But tell
She's
me.
very proud of this piece.
She should be.
Very proud of
But
the film.
did you know she could deliver that kind of singing?
I found that out in rehearsals. I knew she could sing. I didn't know she could sing like that.
Because Sondheim singing is not the same.
That's exactly right, Anne, and you know that. That's because you know Sondheim. It's so challenging, but when you have a great actor challenged by the Sondheim material, who's never been asked to do something
Well,
like
yeah,
that.
I said to her, did you know you could do that, those belty notes? She said, well, nobody's ever asked me to sing like that, so I don't,
I'll never forget, we were rehearsing "Stay with Me," and
Which is the real
which is the
number.
which is the number with Rapunzel.
I think it's the heart of the whole story.
It very much so. I mean, that and "No One Is Alone" to me are sort of the central thematic songs from the piece. She let loose in rehearsals. I got chills. I couldn't believe what was coming out of her mouth, and in addition, the vulnerability and sort of the fragile nature of the witch and the fury. I mean, all of those colors made it so dimensional and so deep. It was really thrilling, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's a reason she's Meryl Streep, because she leaves no stone unturned. I always think of her as an explorer, because in rehearsal, first day of rehearsal, she was completely off book. She was throwing herself into the scenes. Everybody else was standing there with their scripts and going, oh my gosh, the bar's been raised pretty high. They were throwing all their, and they threw their scripts away, so we better get this together, because she was launching herself into this.
Well, even I understand that first sequence, she launched herself too far.
Yes.
I mean, she got rescued, right?
Yes,
what
yes.
happened
Well,
there?
she was on a table, and she decided. I mentioned to her that it might be interesting if she were up on. We at one point we were talking about her sort of moving around the room a lot, sort of even like flying up. So she jumped up on the table on her own because I had sort of mentioned that would be interesting, so she did. And it was a small table, and she was up there doing her thing, and she just went. And I actually caught her. I caught her, and I thought, wow, okay, I better be close to her because, this might happen. But that's what I mean. She just throws herself in.
Well, what are the accessible aspects of this story for audiences? Why is it so successful as a piece of theater?
Well, I think the answer is also in fairy tales. I think there's a reason fairy tales have been around for centuries, because their message is quite simple, really, but there's always a moral to a story, and there's always, they're very female-centric, actually, often. But basically, they are often about belonging in a world, whether you're the child or the young woman, and wanting something more out of your life, and whether you get it or not, or how you get it, and what the price of it is. I just think it hasn't aged in that regard, because we relate to it even when we were working on it. I realized, well, I don't relate to it the way I did when I first wrote it. Now I sort of relate like Baker's father in a funny kind of way. So maybe that's why.
And it does have to do with parents and children, very much so, and loss. But the woods, the metaphor of the woods, and the location of the woods, part of the rules that you're playing with are that you're not leaving the woods. You start out with the baker and his wife, but then you're in the woods.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that Cinderella doesn't go into the ball.
Right.
Was that a conversation?
Well, that was really, actually, we had that in the script originally, and it was sort of a budgetary thing.
Yeah.
But
I
then
thought so. It rings that way.
But then I realized, though, here's the thing, I would have eliminated it anyway.
I think,
Because
at the end, I don't miss it. I was surprised. I didn't miss it, or I didn't miss going up into the Giant's Kingdom either.
Because here's the thing, you're not telling the Cinderella tale alone, or the Jack tale alone. You're intercutting between all these things, and that's the nature of the piece. And there's a little bit of a sense that you have to kind of have some pre-knowledge of what you're seeing. Because if we had shot that, I couldn't spend more time developing the Cinderella story, because I have other it's a real balancing act, this piece. And so there's a certain sense that you have to kind of go with where you are in the story. And the action is that she's running. She's running from the palace. She's not at the ball having a good time and then decide. That's another story. And that's what I love about this piece.
You kind of steer away from the romance quite a bit. We think of Cinderella as the ultimate romantic story. Instead she's running away from the prince. And the prince is being deconstructed into this sort of meta prince.
Well,
was that Chris Pine bringing a little bit of that element, of that comedic element to it?
Well, it's in the material.
It's in the material,
too.
but I haven't seen it portrayed this way.
Well, you know what? Listen, you have this wonderful range of characters, and they're certainly at the one extreme. The truth is, this is a very funny cast, and so they found the humor. Every single one of them, from James Corden, Emily Blunt, to Meryl, to the princes, and the princes have that wonderful. They get to push the envelope the most.
The showstopper.
Yeah.
Did you know that would be the showstopper?
Well,
is it always the showstopper? It is?
Yeah.
Agony?
Agony is, it's a relief for the audience when agony comes. Apropos of what you were talking about, after you were talking, I think, gee, what's the first real song in this show? I guess it's Little Red's song, right?
Or maybe the Wolf song.
But the agony, the agony song gives the release to an audience that they're at a musical and can have a really jolly time. It's a brilliant, really funny song.
I had so much fun staging that with John DeLuca. Because I wasn't sure where to shoot that, and it was like, did I ever tell you the story? What happened?
You went online.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
a brilliant
I did.
place.
I couldn't find anything, and we had a strict sort of time schedule and budget, and so I needed to shoot in this park that we had chosen, which was Windsor Great Park in Windsor, London. It's not London, Windsor, England. And I was, so I went online in the middle of the night, because I thought, we have no place to shoot this. There's got to be something more interesting, more exciting, and I found that waterfall. and that was heaven, because I knew that that would be a
Did you
great
do
place.
the bodice, the bodice rip? That I thought was just.
Oh, of course. I
touch
mean,
of
it's all
genius.
choreographed. Here's
But I
the thing.
mean, the guys doing the bodice ripping
Yes.
is, to themselves is just, that's a brilliant move.
Well, every single bit of it's choreographed. But the most important thing, and I think the best kind of choreography, being a choreographer, is it should look like you never were there, that it's happening in the moment.
Yeah, well, I felt it for sure.
Good.
But
Yeah.
Pine is a real theater man.
Yes, he is.
I've seen him on stage.
Yes,
Oh,
he
yeah?
is.
In the what
the
is it?
Amundsen?
The Inishman. What is
Yeah,
Oh,
the?
Cripple of
Yeah,
Inishman.
yeah.
He
I have-
played the cripple.
He was great. He was great.
Wow,
You know what's amazing about this cast?
Very powerful.
Everyone came from the stage.
I didn't know that.
Everyone. Emily
Well,
Blunt's.
Kendrick was more in college, though, right?
Well, she
Oh,
played
no, she
on
was on
Broadway. She got a
Broadway.
Tony nomination for High Society when she was
I
12.
auditioned her for Little Red Riding Hood. She was the second choice when we did the revival. Yeah, so.
So she comes from stage.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting is that even Emily Blunt, her first job was in the West End in the Royal Family with Judi Dench.
No kidding. Huh.
So when you're rehearsing and when you're, because as you said, Anne, no matter what you do with a musical on film, I feel it will always be a hybrid of theater and film, just in terms of the process of it alone. And there we are doing rehearsals, and I felt so fortunate, so lucky that we had a cast with theater training.
But they're so well calibrated, for film.
Yeah,
That's the hard thing with theater actors,
yeah.
They're so well calibrated. It's amazing.
I'm really glad you're able to talk to each other. This was my idea, and I'm feeling very pleased with myself.
Well, we love each other very much.
Well, so talk about the costumes are amazing, and of course we have Colleen Atwood. But I understand that Johnny got really involved in that process.
Johnny is very involved, as most people know, in his look. I mean, it's something that he loves to do. He sketched his look, and
Really?
yeah, he's a real artist. And Colin and he go back to Edward Scissorhands together. So they've done so much work. Alice in Wonderland, and Sweeney Todd. I could go on and on. Sleepy Hollow. They've done a million movies together, and there's a real camaraderie. And he was always inspired by the Tex Avery cartoons of the 40s and 50s, and the wolf from the Tex Avery cartoon is the one that we know in the zoot suit. And he knew that we weren't looking to make him an actual wolf because it's seen through a child's eyes. So we needed to stylize it in some way. So he said, I'd love to do it in a kind of wolf version of a zoot suit. And so that's what they went to work on.
Whose idea was it to have the candy in the?
That was Johnny.
That's brilliant.
That was Johnny.
That was pretty brilliant.
That's Johnny. That's Johnny, and because he's involved in the creation of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Having worked with him on Pirates, I had that experience with him. He's a real creative force and an amazing collaborator.
Yeah, no, that was great. But that was a risky Little Red Riding Hood, don't you think? Not the obvious. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's edgy.
Well, we love that about Lola. I mean, she was 12 years old when she did that. And what I love about her is she's this real kind of, I think she needs to be able to take care of herself in the woods. That's really important, especially with the wolf. And she's kind of like that typical teenager that's a little bit of the doubter throughout.
She's got a lot of those qualities in life.
Yeah, she does. She does.
She's both confident and vulnerable and a little clueless, as one can be in a young age.
It's that perfect time where they think they know everything, but they know nothing. And,
Yeah.
and James directed her on stage in Annie, and she was the Annie on Broadway in the revival. And that was great to have someone who had to carry a show.
Yeah.
I mean, and we talked about this, but it was so great to be able to speak to her as an actor.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you can.
Super bright person.
Super bright.
So how did you navigate the back and forth with Sondheim? What was the mechanism there?
Well, we did the first draft with, his understanding. We present him with the first draft to see, so we had something complete to look at, and sort of gingerly let him know that certain things had changed, and he was involved in the conversation from there in.
Yeah, it was great. It was fantastic because, you know, it was helpful to have his eye and his thoughts, and they're incredibly astute and helpful. And then it was that back and forth thing. As we make some adjustments, then we show it to him, and back and forth. And it was a trade. It's that wonderful thing with the creative process. You're all working to figure out how to make it a film.
Okay. And he stayed on board. He's
Full on.
cooperative.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Oh yeah, he's a man with opinions, but he also loves movies and knows a lot.
He's also
about film.
demanding. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a collaborator. He really.
You'd be surprised what a collaborator is, because as an example, we made the decision for Cinderella's song on the steps of the palace, to place it in the present. On stage, the action happens off stage. She comes on stage, speaks directly to the audience, and sings what's just happened to her off stage. So it's all sung in the past, when I did this and when that happened. And we made the decision to actually make it happen in the moment. So it becomes a frozen moment in time while there's an internal monologue while she's speaking to herself, figuring out what she's going to do. So it needed to all take place in the present. So Steve completely adjusted the lyrics
Cool.
so that it all is in the present, and rewrote things and kept rewriting until we were actually recording, and he was still working on that. But that's an example of, he didn't hold anything. He wasn't precious about things. He wants to serve it as a film. It was great.
Yeah, we both felt, well, the theater show exists. It's never going away, so it didn't have to be the same on film. People will experience it a different way in the movie. So.
And if you don't do that, then what you do is you do a disservice to the actual
Yeah.
piece on stage, because we've seen movies that take what's on stage and just put it on film, and it doesn't
No, it doesn't- it
translate.
doesn't
You
work.
have to reimagine, yeah.
All right. And so the other thing that's great about this, which is true of the original that you did not lose, is first of all, you have the original orchestrations. That was a decision
Yes,
also.
original orchestrator, but different orchestrations.
So explain.
Well, because on stage there's probably a 20-piece, maybe sometimes 24-piece band if you're lucky. This was a 65-piece orchestra. So the original orchestrator, Jonathan Tunick, who's brilliant, took his orchestrations and then enhanced them for the film.
Okay. Sounds wonderful.
Okay.
No,
it's
it really
So
does.
nice to hear.
All right. Okay, I'm going to let it go. Thank you.
Oh, man, this is a pleasure.
A pleasure for me,
Thank
really.
you. I love that you know it very well. It's nice to hear that.